We are
No estás
going
grabando,
to...
Sam.
Yes.
Que no estás grabando, ¿eh? No
Yeah,
apareces como grabando.
Okay, now I am. Okay, I think we are now live on Facebook, and we're going to start this meeting. Hello, everyone. Officially, hello, everyone that is joining this meeting right now. We are so happy to have you here. And today we are going to, well, I'm going to interview a son and a grandson of a Holocaust survivor. We have here Barry and Joshua Szafran, and they are going to tell Nathan's Szafran's story. You know, it's important the descendants of the Holocaust survivors to be their voices. So, hello, how are you, Barry, first?
Hello, how are you? I'm in Boynton Beach, near Miami, Florida, is where I'm joining you from today.
Oh, yes, that's good. Thank you so much for being here. He's the son, you know, of
Want to see
Nathan.
the snow? Look at that.
Oh, you have snow there in Canada,
Oh,
right,
yeah,
Johnny?
there's snow here. Yeah, I will show it to you. No, you cannot see.
Yeah, more or less we can see, but okay, thank you. So now, how are you, Joshua?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so yes, thank you, everyone. If you can turn on your camera, everyone, it will be nice, you know, so we can see each other. I think more people is going to join in some minutes, but we are starting this interview. For me, it's an honor doing this project that is called The Voice of the Silence, and also working with Diario Judío with Isaac here in Mexico. So thank you, everyone, for joining to this meeting. And I will ask some questions to Barry, that is the son of the survivor, and Joshua, and other questions. So let's start. I want to ask you, Barry, first. What was the name of your dad, and where was he from? From which city, you know, and country?
Well, my dad's name was Nathan Szafran. He was born March 19th, 1925 in a town called Strykow, Strykow, Poland, which is probably about 20 kilometers from Lodz and about 2.5 hours from Warsaw.
Oh, okay. Yes, and can you tell us how was like his childhood, you know, with his family? Were they religious? What did they do as a family? What was his environment?
Well, yes, Dad was one of 7 children. He had 6 other brothers, or 5 brothers, 2 sisters, and they grew up in a religious environment in a household. His father and his mother, they did keep kosher in the home, and he grew up, he was going to religious school when it was allowed and when he had the opportunity. And a lot of times he would go to religious school, and it would be like after his regular education, he would be going like 4 days a week after that school was over to the religious school. And by the end of the week, if he didn't learn what they wanted him to learn, he was in there all day on Sunday as well.
And Thursday, right before Shabbat.
Yes.
Thank you.
They were like a really religious family, right? They used to go to, yes, to Shabbat, to all these Jewish traditions and all this. Okay, I want to make it like interactive. You know, I think it's amazing to have the son and the grandson of the survivor of Nathan. So I want to ask you, Joshua, what did you know? Like, how did his life, your grandfather's life, changed when the Nazis occupied Poland?
Well, initially, he was born in 1925, so he was pretty young when it first started. He was around 11, 12 years old when the occupation first set forth. Like his older brother, Barish, who my father is actually named after, was part of, trying to fight off the Nazis, but ultimately lost, but got returned home. One interesting thing about his home life
I
that was
think,
kind of,
Josh, hey, Josh, I think you should mention that Parrish was actually in the Polish army.
yes, that's what I mean. He was in the Polish army.
Yeah.
But one thing that was kind of interesting, my grandfather's family was one of the few Polish families in all of one of the few Jewish families in all of Poland allowed to own land, because my grandfather's either grandfather or great grandfather lost a leg fighting the Russians in some revolution in the late 1800s, and from that point on, his family was allowed to have the land, and he was awarded land that was passed down. So that was kind of neat. But my grandfather himself, he was always savvy, always prideful, and he always knew how to game the system. So there was always some anti-Semitism around, even though there was a decent, maybe 30% Jewish population in the small town. If somebody made a comment, he was the kind of person who would take a wooden pencil box and smack them with it. But then when the teacher would say, okay, well, go home and bring your parent back, you're in trouble, he would just wander around town, go back to school and be like, yeah, nobody's home. So he always knew the angle. I see somebody in the chat just asked what the name of the town was. The name of the town was Strykov, Strykow. But my grandfather, the house they had, it was basically on this it had a creek on the backside. And the winter when the creek froze over, they would go ice skating. They were, they had fun as kids. But when the occupation started, at first, my father would actually go to work with his father, who worked in sheet metal, and they would actually be sent out to work on the Nazis' barracks, working for the Germans in different capacities before they took full control. At first, they were still compensating them. And then at one point, when they actually turned Strykov into a small ghetto, they actually sent my grandfather to a small work camp for 3 or 4 months where there was no compensation. He was basically working on processing coal or something like that, processing and selling it. So the occupation was gradual, and it wasn't total control at first. It was just little by little. So it was tough to realize what was happening until it was too late.
Yes, yes, you're true, because, well, I watched it, his testimony. We can share with all of you if you want to, to hear Nathan by his voice, his testimony. But yes, he was telling that, yeah, obviously most of them, they weren't realizing what was happening, because it was, as you said, so gradual that they didn't notice what was starting to happen. And obviously, yeah, it ended in a terrible, a terrible event in the whole humanity's history. So, yes, and
But in a way also, you want to have the blinders on, because something is going on, but you don't want to know the full extent of it, because that will bring up more concerns and more worries. I mean, you're sort of he knew something was going on, but you're turning a blind eye and focusing on the family and such like that to keep an eye on that.
Yeah,
is what he was actually doing.
Ignorance is bliss, and he was 12 or 13 at the time, and he might have been skeptical, but at the same time, it was the fact that his father worked in sheet metal that really kept them around longer than a lot of other people. They were essentially the last to move from each point where they were at. From the Strykov ghetto, they were moved to Glovno, then Strykov, the Nazis wanted them back there because they needed somebody to do sheet metal, and then ultimately they were sent to another area that wasn't another ghetto, and then they were sent to Lodz. But it was the fact they had a skill that really preserved them, which was, a matter of luck and also savvy, being able to assert the fact that he was capable when he was only 12 or 13.
Was 14.
yes, exactly. The abilities you had at that time, that could save your life, right? That's why I put this title to this interview. But yes, I want to ask you, like, okay, Barry, what did your dad used to tell you about his experience first in these first months and years, you know, like when he was in the ghettos and in the labor camp? What like difficult experience did he remember about that?
Well, I never actually addressed any of this with my father until after my first visit to Poland in 1974. Before that time, him and his brother, my uncle Daniel, would all the time they'd speak, and whether they were speaking of that and speaking of the history and what they remember, I could never tell because it was always a three-language conversation. My father would say something in English, my uncle might answer in Polish, my father would return the conversation in Yiddish. So I could never gauge exactly what they were speaking of and what the conversation was about. Sometimes you might be able to hear something in English and get something of that, but I never really addressed anything of the Holocaust and such until after my first visit in 1974. And that could have been also because, in the curriculum in schools in the 70s, not Holocaust, anything was never taught, never spoke of or anything, unlike today where it's required curriculum in lots of schools to know about the Holocaust and to speak of it. So although, I know I was Jewish, I know my upbringing, I know that my dad had survived it, I never actually had spoke of it until after I was exposed to it the first time.
And can you tell us how was that experience, you know, to go to Poland, experience all this about your dad's past, you know, and to know more about what happened with him?
I mean, it was a very eye-opening experience to be able to go around the town and look at it. But then, this was already, 30 years later, and it was hard to gauge looking at, you go to a small town now and it's been rebuilt and everything else. And the folks there, they really don't speak of it. Myself, I don't speak Polish, so I couldn't converse with them on it. I'd have to rely on, Dad always giving the, translations and stuff. But to look around, it was always, even after my first time there, the dad was being welcomed back there with open arms and such. In that particular small town, I didn't view any anti-Semitism there in the 70s. Was it still existent? Of course. But, and the thing is the same thing as my father did, and how he survived was to turn a blind eye. It's happening. You don't want to see it. You want to focus on the straight ahead and the narrow and worry about, hard to say, worry about number one, yourself at the time.
Yes, of course. I think you know the experience you had to go to your dad's town and all this, and I know that also Joshua, right? You went.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. So my father went in 74. So my father was around 13 when he went. I was maybe 12 or 13 when I went in, I want to say 2002, 2003, something like that. I spent the summer in Poland with my grandfather. He took me to
You were
Lodz.
there in
Summer
yeah,
2002, I want to say.
yeah, something about.
Yeah, so we went to Auschwitz. He showed me exactly which building he was in. Actually, he in the, not the main camp, but one of the camps, the Auschwitz Central Camp. That's where they had the masonry school that he actually went to. He actually signed his number in the guest book. They had a guest book in that building. When I was there last year, they didn't actually have a guest book anymore, but he did that. And, for me, it was very, like, you could feel everything. It was very palpable. like going around, you would see gallows, you would see the wall where they would actually shoot people. You know, of the two camps, the camp that he spent more time in, where the school was and everything, that one was a bit more impactful, because the other one, at least when I went 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, a lot of it was already decayed. Most of the buildings were already torn down. The showers or the gas chambers, they were mostly collapsed. So a lot of the visual wasn't preserved.
Yes, but yeah, I think it's important to get back to your what happened to your family. I've been too, you know, to Auschwitz, to other concentration camps, as we talked last week about our family. But it's important, you know, to know what happened. It's not the same, as I always say. It's not the same to read it in books, to watch it on movies. When you experience in person, something changed in you. So I think I can show the picture of your grandfather and dad here in it was in the block he was, right, in Auschwitz.
Yep, that's Barracks 13. That was the building he was in Auschwitz. Yes.
And here's
That
the
was-
other one right there. Hold on. Trying to pull up, I don't know if it'll pop up there or not.
I don't
Will
know.
it pop? Okay, but anyways, that was that one.
Okay, so now that we are talking about his, you know, him being in Auschwitz, I want to ask, I don't know if Barry or Joshua, if you want to tell us about his survival in Auschwitz, you know, the things that he went through.
So I'm sure me and my father can kind of play off each other a little bit, but right before you get to the Auschwitz point, you have to realize, you know, before each transition from one place to another, they did a selection where, you know, they would basically judge if you were capable, if they wanted to either move you on or dispose of you. Now, my grandfather and his father and his younger brother Daniel, they didn't quite understand what was happening at all times. So in the Lodz ghetto, they did a selection and they loaded my grandfather, his brother, and his father into a cart. And you know, they didn't know if this cart was going to Auschwitz or what was happening. And I guess my grandfather's father made kind of a ruckus, and my grandfather and his brother, they ran and they hid out for a few days, you know, under a building or something like that. They just kind of hid out, found scraps until the heat died down. Like they didn't know if the people who were going to transport them were looking for them specifically anymore, but they returned and things kind of resumed until ultimately, you know, Lodz began to be liquidated, meaning the train started coming and transporting everybody out of there. So when he got to Auschwitz, it was him. Okay, so sorry, I skipped a little bit. When his father made a ruckus, you know, his father stayed behind, and that was the last they saw of his father. You know, his two younger brothers had already been sent somewhere, and ultimately, you know, my grandfather traced everybody to where they ended up. But, you know, by that time, it was just him, his younger brother Daniel, his two sisters, and his mother. And when he got to Auschwitz, the mother and the two sisters were sent in one direction. Him and his brother were sent in the other. When they got there, Joseph Mengele and a few guards and capos and people, they were rushing them out of the train, you know, beating them, hurry up. And, you know, if somebody refused to be separated, you know, the Nazis wouldn't like pull them apart, but they would just push them together and rush them in one direction. So my grandfather, he understood when it was time to be compliant, but he also took risks in terms of gaming the system. You know, he found ways to get extra food. You know, he found ways to survive. And the other thing, he was probably 16, 17 by the time he got to Auschwitz. It was already 1944, late 43. So it was interesting that
He's already 18, 19 years old. He was already 19 years old.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is, he'd already been through a few places, and he already kind of built up a network of people that he knew, and he would run into these people at the different camps later on, and he learned to, all right, hey, have you seen my brother Barish? And that's how he found out, like, yeah, he's no longer with us. Like, there was another person that he knew from one camp, and then from Auschwitz, and then from Sachsenhausen, and then he was on the death march with him. Like, he was savvy enough to kind of build up this network of people who they relied on each other, and they were able to work and game the system.
Yes. Can you tell us how did he manage to get that extra food and to, yeah, as you said, like trick the system?
Yeah, like my grandfather and his brother, if there was an opportunity to go back in line a second time, they would do that. Or I heard from my great uncle Daniel, who's still alive. He lives in upstate New York, up in Canton. He would charm females working in the camp, and they took a liking to him. They had this appeal to them that even though there was this submissive nature to being inmate, people liked them. The guards liked them. They were, if something needed to be done, they did it. Whether okay, I need somebody who's an expert gardener, I need somebody who's an expert bricklayer. My grandfather was the first to raise his hand and say, I got it. And even if he's never done it before, he did it right, he did it the best, and it only took him one time. Wow. So he made himself useful enough where they wanted to keep him alive as much as he wanted to stay alive, and he made sure his brother was with him every step of the way as well.
Yes, I think that was some of the keys, to survive. I think to maybe you didn't know how to do something, but you say, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And I think that's a thing that helped a lot to your grandfather, and that, right? So
yeah, like I don't want to, like, pardon my French a little bit, but it was kind of master bullshitter where excellent poker bluff, if you will, where he made people believe it and then he just made it happen. So that was kind of the key, where growing up, his father did sheet metal siding, roofing, and eventually, like, he just kind of converted that into anything that needed to be done, rather than he realized having that skill was something that was better than working out in a field or digging ditches or something like that, where it was more expendable. He didn't want to be expendable, he wanted to be useful, and he was savvy enough to realize that way early on.
Wow. Okay, so now I want to ask Barry, what difficult experiences did your dad well, I know you said that he didn't talk to you, tell you maybe what happened, but what difficult? I know everything was difficult, but I don't know what like specific experiences did he used to talk, or maybe in his testimony he said in Auschwitz.
Well, and the thing is, a lot, I could say a lot that Dad growing up would never share a lot with us. And maybe it was for the, with me and my sister, maybe it was for the fact that, he wanted us to grow up having a perfect life and not exposing us to the horrors and terrors that he grew up with. If they were spoke of, and if you wanted to, a lot of times it would turn into a very short and brief conversation. He would, it would always be with Dad, get to the point. You want to know something, get to the point. I'm not going to go into the full discussion. What do you want to know? And I'll tell you about that. But, a lot of it, like I say, he grew up with it. He didn't want to expose, his children, me and my sister, directly to the horrors that he grew up with.
Yeah,
Anytime we wanted to speak of it, it was like, you have a point, get to the point already, and that's it. You heard that many times, Josh.
of course. And just to kind of build on that, though, like my grandfather, after the war, he was drafted in the U.S. Army. And, my grandfather, later on in 67, he went to Israel after the Army while my father was a young child. And he actually, wanted to see if they needed him for anything. Now, expressively, he was not like he was an ultra-Zionist. He was pro-Israel, of course, and he volunteered to see if he could do anything. But my point is, when I was younger, when I was 18, I moved to Israel and I joined the Israeli army myself. But he was not the most gung-ho, oh my gosh, I'm so proud. Because for him, it was, he already went through so much. Why should I have to do it if he already did it? That was his mentality. So, even exposing, explaining things, he didn't want to pass all of it down just because he figured he's carrying that burden, so the rest of his family doesn't have to. Like my grandmother even told me, my Nana, my father's mother, that even up until he passed away 5 years ago, that he still had nightmares of what he went through. Like it was scary stuff. In the main camp in Auschwitz, he would see people being hanged. He would see people being shot. He saw somebody being shot when he was 11, 12 years old at a labor camp before the official camps and everything even started. Somebody who just tried to escape. Like being exposed to that so young. And I would say, just a little bit of speculation, the thing that he learned, the biggest lesson he learned throughout the Holocaust was that self-control, where when he was a young kid, if somebody made a joke to him, and I said this early on, he was the kind of person to snap back and turn things physical very quickly. But once everything started and, the Nazis took control, the Germans took control, he realized, fighting back was the quickest way to get killed. So his way of fighting back had to be much more passive, being able to get extra rations, if there's an opportunity to get back in line, being able to get better jobs in the different areas. That was his way of really fighting back versus, being impulsive, which was something as a kid. And I had the same problem when I was a kid. I had a lot of impulse issues and I was very quick to snap. So that was just something I was able to relate with him on. But I would definitely say that was something that he definitely had to learn to adapt very quickly to, being much more calculating in his moves versus being impulsive.
Yes, I understand when you said that. He didn't tell you, right, about maybe specific situations because of, well, obviously he didn't want you to suffer. Again, the things he went through. I think that happened too with my family. My great grandfather, he didn't say a thing, about his family to my grandma. And this is a normal thing that happens with most of survivors. It's difficult to talk about your story. But yes, I think obviously he was so young and he needed to.
Like when I went to the camps with him, he would show me, okay, this is where this happened. This is where they had the school. He showed me where the crematorium is at Auschwitz, which looks like it's buried under a hill. You said you've been there, so I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like they had no idea what that was until he went back there a few years later. So, it was still, whether, like my father said, whether it was they kind of knew because people were disappearing, but they didn't want to know, or he just didn't know. But it was like the biggest issue, the biggest struggle was that unknown. And even a lot of the stuff that he came to realize, he realized after the fact. And one thing, like my grandfather would talk more openly about, was his childhood growing up in Poland, things like that, which it's kind of ironic because he returned to that same small town for many, many years, right up until he passed away at 90 years old. Yet he left that small town at like 15 or 16, and that small town changed entirely when he was like 14 because that's when they put a ghetto in there. So he was basically holding on to or preserving that childhood. And, you know, they spoke Yiddish in the home growing up. Polish was kind of a second language. He knew it, but he learned that he always had to adapt. You know, he later picked up German pretty quickly. He was able to understand other languages, although he couldn't speak them fluently. Like if he was on a train, he could understand somebody speaking Russian, even though like he couldn't converse with them. He was always very savvy and realized he had to pick up these skills to survive, and it wasn't about flaunting them. Like my grandfather, my father might know exactly, but I think he had a 6th grade education, and he was not the greatest student. And when he got to America later on, he didn't go back to school. He was not an academic, but he had a very sharp mind. But he wasn't about showing off a list of credentials. He wasn't about showing like, okay, I have this degree, I have this certificate, you know, oh, look at me. It was more about, all right, I have these skills, I'm going to use these skills, and this is what I'm going to do. I don't have to show off.
And that's exactly what it is. I mean, in all the years up until the way passed, my father would never know how to use a computer. He'd never know how to use a cell phone. All the time, even my growing up, the telephone was right next to my father, but he would say, Shirley, get Daniel on the phone, because my father couldn't comprehend how to pick it up and dial the phone number for his brother.
Yeah.
If somebody would ask him his phone number, you know, if he was out on a job site, because my father was a painting contractor, and they wanted, you know, what's your phone number? Dad would have to pull out his business card to read off his phone number to give it to him. It wasn't important. Electronics wasn't important to him. Technology wasn't important to him. It was the skills and the knowledge of surviving in life. You know,
exactly.
And, you know, people make jokes of it today that, you know, they see, they show you, and you've seen the memes of it on the computer, an old TV, and they say, I had to walk through 6 feet of shag carpet because I was the remote control. I can guarantee you I was the remote control. Dad wouldn't know how to change a channel on a TV. If he had to, put on the TV, put this on for me. It didn't concern him, you know, to learn that stuff in life. He knew how to survive, and that was it. The technology, you know, was advancing, and that was it.
The interesting thing, though, is he didn't come to America until 1950. After the war, his brother was, you know, the Jewish agency in Germany, you know, people under a certain age, they were basically, I don't want to use the term indoctrinated, but they were sent to a school, and then, you know, they were taught like this ultra-Zionism, and they were allowed to be transported to Israel. But my grandfather was older. He was already 19. He wasn't qualified for that. And if he wanted to go to Israel, he would have to sneak in. So he actually stayed in Germany for about 5 years. Now, what he did in Germany, you know, he got by. He knew how to hustle. He would be working the black market. You know, if goods fell off a truck, he would be able to resell them. And he made the connections where he would just build up a network, and he would be selling goods, making money. You know, he found first cousins or distant cousins that had survived, and he would help them out. And he would keep in touch with his brother Daniel via writing. Now, later on, when he got to America in 1950, he just realized, all right, well, you know, I don't really want to settle down here. And there was a refugee transport to America. He got transported there, and then they drafted him. He wasn't even a citizen yet. Now, you know, initially he didn't realize what that meant. You know, he got called into some enlistment center. They're like, all right, you're not qualified. You know, he didn't really speak the language yet. He put it off until finally, you know, he asked a friend, okay, what's his letter mean? They're like, yeah, you got to go. He goes to boot camp, he does it, and then he kind of goes AWOL. But he doesn't realize he's AWOL. He's just like, all right, well, they don't need me, I'm out of here. He gets called back. They send him to Germany, right back to where he was. He was a driver. He got the rank of sergeant, but even in the army, he knew how to work the system, where when there was an opportunity, you know, when somebody wanted something that he's just like, all right, whatever, he'd be like, yeah, I don't understand. I don't speak it, whatever. But he taught himself English well enough by going to the movies, and he understood everything, but he knew when to invoke certain things to get away with it. And when he was a driver, he went back to doing the black market stuff out of the back of the truck, and he actually became a citizen at an embassy in Germany just by memorizing verbatim all the questions and answers. Like his buddies kind of trained him, okay, this is what you say, this is what you say. He didn't study, but they told him enough where he just got it, but he didn't even know what he was saying. So yeah, that's how he became a citizen after he was already in the army at some embassy where and then he used the fact that he was a citizen to sponsor his brother to come to America later on.
Wow, yes, I think well, he was in the army right after all this,
Yeah.
so it's like incredible that someone wants to go to the army, you know, after being in all these
Well, it's not that he wanted to go, it's that he was drafted.
Well,
he didn't even know what the papers meant at first until ultimately they sent him, and he asked his buddy, and they're just like, yeah, you have to go. So, you know, he's just like, all right, you know, he did what he was supposed to do. And they realized that, all right, he from living in Germany for 5 years afterwards, he spoke fluent enough German, so that's why they sent him there. But yeah, him and his brother were in contact all the time. His brother went to Israel after Daniel, and his brother actually served in Milchamat Ma'ut, or Israel's War of Independence, in 48, and then the Suez Crisis in 56. His brother lived on a kibbutz, met his wife Simona, who's from Romania, and they had 2 children, and then came to America in 62.
Well, I think I have these photos here of your grandfather. It was after war, right?
Yep, that's in the army, lying back, relaxing.
And also, I think we have this certificate of the the
Yep,
army.
that was his army ID.
Yes. Well, so okay. Yeah, you already told us how he came to the United States. You know, first the issue with Israel and all this, and then he came to the USA. So I want to ask you, like, both of you first, maybe to Barry, how do you live being a son of a Holocaust survivor? How do you have been living, you know, all your life? Like, I don't know what you can tell us about it.
You know, I say, how do you live? You know, you try and communicate all the time. I'm a member of many pages on the internet. There's many of them which are, I'm a member of a group of children of Holocaust survivors. There's many Holocaust surviving groups of descendants and survivors that are on the internet that I communicate with them. You know, if there's questions that are asked, and I can ask them that. My uncle, as a matter of fact, for many years still, I don't, you know, when he was still living in Las Vegas still a few years ago, he was communicating with schools, with groups, and telling stories. I don't know now if he's still doing that in New York, but you know, I have many friends who are teachers and such, and I try to pass along, you know, as much knowledge and information as I have that can continue to be passed along for generations, you know, because it's something that, you know, as I said earlier, you know, when I was growing up in the 70s, there was nothing in the schools and the curriculum mentions of it. It wasn't a subject. And nowadays in the schools, growing up in the high schools and everything, it's a required curriculum to study of the Holocaust, to know of it.
Yes, exactly. I think it's important, you know, by the education for more people to know about this and young generations. But yes, well, I want to ask Joshua, how have you been living with this, like knowing you're a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, how did it affect it to you in somehow? Maybe that's the way of the question.
Yeah, no, I understand the question. So when I was, like I said earlier, I went to Auschwitz when I was 11, 12 years old. And after that, I had this realization that all this family died just for being Jewish. And I didn't really know what it meant to me. I didn't grow up with a lot of religion in the home. So after that, I started exploring, started researching. Ultimately, that led to me to move to Israel when I was 18 and join the Israeli army. I did that for 2 years. I served in the Givati Brigade. We had the Purple Beret. Uh, I was in Givati, but even when I was in Israel and I was trying to explore Judaism and what that meant to me, I realized being Jewish, it's not just a religion, it's not just a culture, it's this meshing of both together where you don't need to keep kosher all the time to be a good Jew. You don't need to study Torah, keep Shabbat. There's going to be people who are going to judge you no matter what. There'll be somebody who's to them more Jewish that'll judge you, or there's going to be somebody who's less Jewish that will still judge you. The point is, it's about being proud of your heritage and being about preserving the heritage and preserving the culture and that being proud of that identity. Now, I would say I'm very Zionist. I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage, very proud of my Jewish identity, even though I'm not practicing and everything. Now, with that, I've learned over the past couple years that being a Jew, it's not a partisan thing. It's not, okay, well, you're a Jew, so you're automatically a Republican or automatically a Democrat or what have you. I'm sure in other countries they might have different political affiliations, but it doesn't mean you're one or the other, because the reality is, and my grandfather actually says this pretty well at the end of his testimony video, which I'm sure we can post a link to. It's about not trusting everything you see and hear, because there's people who hate. Anti-Semitism is a nonpartisan thing, where there's going to be people who hate Jews on the left, on the right, and no matter where it is, it needs to be called out. And I do that frequently. I'm a very strong supporter of Israel, even though I can be critical of Israel, because I realize without Israel, without having a sanctuary for the Jewish people, there likely will be another Holocaust level event. So that's why Israel needs to survive, because everywhere in the world there is anti-Semitic laws, there's anti-Semitic actions, there's people that ignore the anti-Semitic events that happen so frequently. So I always try to share anything that's happening that I believe to be sanctioned by either a government, a job, an institution, that people just kind of let it go, where in America right now, things are very heightened with racial polarization. And I always think, okay, well, when something happens with Jews and nobody posts about it, nobody asks questions, nobody really cares. But if it happened to a different minority class, the headlines would be going wild. People are so desensitized to anti-Semitism where they just let it roll. They don't even care. So I always try to shed a light on that. And I call out other Jews who I believe aren't benefiting, aren't contributing, or aren't helping the Jewish people, where people might identify as Jews, but at the same time, their conduct is actually detrimental and hurting our identity.
Yes, I think that's so true, right? Nowadays we have a lot of discrimination and also anti-Semitism, and maybe it's not recognized, But I think talking about history and all the stories of these survivors and the ones that didn't make it, it's a way to contribute to learn to not hate, not just to Jews, to everyone, to learn not to hate, and to have a better world, because it has been so terrible what hate has caused in the humanity. So talking about that kind of advices, I wanted to ask Barry, what advice do you think Nathan, your dad, would have given to my young generation?
The first thing would be to be aware of everything that's going on around you. Don't keep don't keep the narrow focus. You have to be aware of your complete and total surroundings and what is happening around you. Just because it doesn't involve you directly, you still need to know what is happening around you. And that's one thing. My father, all the time growing up, he would read. He would get the New York Times every day. He would read it from cover to cover and read every single article in it. It would take him 6 hours just to read the newspaper, and it wasn't, like I say, this was the New York Times, and it's not even local stuff. He just wants to be aware of what's going on everywhere around him, and he would read everything completely in depth on it. And that's the thing, you can't be just narrow focused on, your complete, your immediate surroundings. You need to know what's happening around you all the time, everywhere, and be focused on it, whether you're not a part of it or not.
Yes, exactly. I think it's so important to, as we were talking at the beginning, to don't live in the ignorance, because that's what leads us to commit more of these horrible things that happen. And I want to remark, like, well, not the exact words he used, but I was listening to his testimony, and he said that the advice he was giving, mainly it was what you explained, right? But he said, don't be in the dark. He was telling that don't be in the dark. So that's a lesson for us to be more aware and do not be in the ignorance of all the things that are happening. And also he was saying that we should ask questions. We should like question it, the things that are happening, that because there was maybe obviously they weren't guilty of what happened, but maybe there was an error, to not asking questions. Maybe they were not going to answer, obviously the Nazis and all, obviously maybe they weren't going to answer, but that's a good lesson. And okay, I think, I don't know if anyone has another
Yeah, I have a
question.
question.
Oh, go ahead, Johnny.
Would you happen to know your grandfather Auschwitz number?
I'm sure I have a picture of it somewhere. My father
Because-
probably knows.
Hold on. I got it right here, and it is B8107.
Oh, so he came the late 1944.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Yes.
Maybe
Yeah,
I knew
late
him.
44 is when he went to Auschwitz.
Would you
sorry?
happen to know the block in Auschwitz he was in?
Well, he was in building
13.
13. We had the picture of that she showed. It was 13.
Oh yeah, block 14, I think.
13, 1-3.
13, yeah, I was block 19. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have
thank
actually, I have a message for all of you. You see, we survivors happen to witness the biggest murder in the history of the world. Now, the only way to prevent again is by education. This is the key, education. Because when baby is born, the baby is not anti-Semitic, the baby doesn't know hate. The way you raise them, that's the way they're gonna be. This is the key, education. And there is only few of us left. And I'm involved very much in the on the Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Yes, as you always say, right? Education is the key for these generations. That's why we are doing these interviews. Okay, I think, I don't know, Isaac, if you have another question for them.
Yes, I wanted to know with Barry, with Joshua, what does it mean for you to have here in this conversation other survivors, because it's interesting that just in these cases with Samantha, it happens. Every time I am in a meeting with a survivor in a conference, there is one survivor or somebody talking about it, and all the people that are hearing are not survivors or doesn't have any relation. But here you have other survivors, many of them. What does it mean for you to share your experience, your grandfather or your father experience with other survivors and hear about with them?
Well, the thing is, it's a part of our history, and it should never be forgotten. And that's the thing, if people don't speak of it, they're not going to know of it anymore. And just by speaking with us and whatever, you can always develop another. You can try and develop another story and learn more from it. Just like we just heard from Johnny there, that Johnny, he could tell straight off from my father's number that he was in Auschwitz in 1944, and Johnny was saying that he was in Barracks 19. So, I can, whether I know him or not, I can directly relate to it because I've been Auschwitz. I know 19. So now, if I were to look at a picture, I could say, I know somebody else who was there as well.
Well,
Exactly.
Block 19? In Block 19?
No,
I might have a photo of it. I do not know. I'd have to look, Johnny.
Yeah.
yeah, like I've been to Auschwitz twice. I've taken many pictures. But to answer Isaac's question, being able to share my grandfather's experience with other survivors, it's easier than sharing with people who don't have the same type of connection. Although it's more impactful to share with people who aren't connected to it, but a lot of times they're unable to comprehend the magnitude of it. People hear 6 million plus all the time, and I know people personally who, no matter what I show them, they can't believe it was 6 million. They think it was grossly overestimated or whatever. Now, when I share the experience with other survivors, I don't feel like I'm being interrogated. I feel like it's more that understanding and relating versus somebody who's, interrogating you, trying to either, catch you in a lie or disprove you or something like that. So it's much more comfortable. Although, like I said, it's still more impactful to go the hard route and talk with people who haven't gone through it. But the last time I did, I sat with somebody who survivor who was speaking about a year and a half ago at a local Jewish event, and this person was from, I forgot where in Poland, but I guess he has one of the larger Holocaust relating antiques that he donated to the Holocaust Museum in DC, and he's local to Baltimore, but he had I could sense so much hatred in him, and I got that from from other survivors I met or family of survivors, and that was just something that growing up I didn't quite understand, because the only survivor I knew was my grandfather, and he was not a hateful person, but he was still a very serious person. Going back to Poland all the time, when my grandfather was in Poland, being around the people he would be able to relax, do shots of vodka with people. I had my first vodka when I was 11, 12 years old with my grandfather in Poland. I don't know if any of you have been, but in the small towns, you go over somebody's place for breakfast, they'll give you a piece of cake, they'll offer you coffee or vodka. Once you drink the vodka, they pour you another shot. That's just the way it is. So, it's not always relating with the Holocaust stuff, but it's also the pre-war small town memories that people can understand, and it's just that community of it, which I think it's still very important to try to preserve before everything was so divided. And that was something my grandfather kind of rebuilt after the war and going back there all the time.
You see, I used to hate so much that I knew it's a poison, was killing me. I stopped hating. I don't hate anymore. No.
I was going to ask about that, Johnny. exactly to Joshua and to Barry and about what they knew about their grandfather and father. You know, many people, my father, for example, he was from Poland. He escaped
Yeah.
from Poland and he didn't want to go back there. He forgot about talking about in Polish. He didn't want to know anything about Poland. He was, I don't want to talk it. When I went into Poland in the March of the Living, there, he was also like, why? It's very hard for many people
Yeah.
to stop. My mother still doesn't buy anything that is German or Polish. Yes. What do you think of that? Do we have to have regrets about it?
Well,
Do
yeah.
we have to have hate? Do we have to forgive all of them? What is the you like a third generation, Joshua? We know.
Yes.
No, I was in Poland this January for the 75th anniversary of Auschwitz liberation.
Yes.
I was sitting with the two Polish so-called survivors. They couldn't be survivors because they were much younger. And I shook the hands, and I have a good grip. He says, "How come you have such a good grip?" I said, "Because I play golf." So he said, "You know what he says? Oh, the old Jews, they have money because they play golf." I shut up. I didn't want to talk to them anymore. You
Yeah.
know,
Like
the Jews have
it's
money. It stays like that. Didn't want to discuss.
those anti-Semitic tropes are still very common throughout the world. Unfortunately, I understand the hate of the people of the first generation survivors. I understand it, but hate is also contagious. That's why when I meet other people whose family survived and they still have so much hate towards Poland, you know, I get how the hate is contagious, but that hate needs to be overcome. And I'm just very fortunate that my grandfather didn't pass hate to me, but my grandfather and even my father, they taught me, judge each person by who they are as individuals, not by where they come from or who their family is or what religion they are. If somebody's a good person, they're a good person. It doesn't matter what they look like or where they're from.
That's what
Grow,
that's
yeah.
why I say education. That's the only key. The way you educate the people, they grow up. On the 75th anniversary, you know who came to me? The president of Poland. I have a picture. Shook my hand. He said in Polish, I speak perfect Polish. He says, "You have to excuse me and excuse what happened here."
Okay, let me bring one thing here. In From 1996 until 2000, I was working for the United States State Department, and I was working with diplomatic security, and I was going all over the world to all the United States embassies and consulates, taking care of their security. When I started there, I told them, my boss, I said, when the trip to Poland comes up, I want it. Well, it was coming up to go to Poland. I was a senior leader, and it was coming up like in January of a year. And I said to Dad, Dad, I said, you're going with me to Poland. And he was like, I've already been a couple times. Dad said, it's too cold. I'm not going. I said, yeah, you are. And so ultimately, we went to Warsaw to the American Embassy where I was working, and Dad was staying to the hotel and such. But the United States ambassador knew that I was there, and I told him that my father was there also in my father's story. They brought my father into the American Embassy, and the United States ambassador took my father, wanted to know everything he did. My father told him the whole life story of everything there, went around Warsaw with him to all the different people and such. And that was in Warsaw. Then after that, we had to go to the consulate in, where the heck's the Polish consulate? In Krakow. And the same thing there. The United Consulate General there, same thing with my father. Took my father and took hours and hours to know everything because he said it was important for him as being first the ambassador and as the consulate general to know, you know, an inside view of the country they were in there representing for the United States, because all they were getting was the view of the expression from the Polish people, but they wanted to know everything from the years before. And that was, you know, the best trip I ever had with my father was from that.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, just relating to this, in 1996, that was just 5-6 years after the USSR dissolved and Poland was no longer under the control of the Soviet Union. When it was under Soviet control, a lot of the Holocaust education, a lot of what happened was blocked off by the government. So things were just starting to open back up, and a lot of the stories were just coming out in the 90s. In the 90s, 50 years later, that's when everything was just being made public. So that's kind of interesting. Where even like my father said, go ahead.
No, go say.
Yeah, I was going to say, you grew up in the 70s, and a lot of the stuff, it was the U.S. perspective where a lot of the records were still sealed. There's a lot of the stuff was just under lock and key. So, it wasn't until nearly 50 years later that things were really made public, which, that's just something that we can't take for granted.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, as I said, okay, nowadays, maybe in schools, even here in Mexico, obviously in the universal history, we learn about the Holocaust, but it's just like a little bit, it's not like you learn a lot. Okay, I think Eddie has a couple of questions, but before that, I wanted to take a picture as I always do of the meeting, because I think some people are like maybe leaving because I don't know, but yeah, if you can turn on your camera, it will be nice, because I can take this picture of the meeting. So okay, I will wait just a second, see if someone else wants or can turn on your camera. Okay. As I told you, most of the young people, they don't like to turn on the camera. I don't know why, but we have young people too here, okay? I don't know what happens, but okay, if you can, don't worry, but I will take the photo. So, okay. Yes. One.
Otro.
Yes, Marcos. Marcos from Spain, Sharon, Monse, Josh, but okay, don't worry if you can't. So I will take the photo. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Okay, so now I will like Eddie to ask the questions he was writing in the chat if he wants.
I think they were largely answered. I mean, I always have the question, and you did say it before, but I'll say it again. Oh, I'll get closer. I guess that the question is, what do you see as the lessons of the Holocaust? Both of you, Harry, Joshua, maybe Johnny. What are the lessons?
All right, who wants to go first?
I'm sorry, I really didn't hear the question that well. It was breaking up.
He asked, what are the lessons of the Holocaust?
That's a tough thing. The lessons, and what, you like I said earlier too, you have to, be aware of everything that's going on around you, and you can't keep a blind eye. You have to know what's going on, and you have to act accordingly, and you have to, how can I say, adapt and overcome. As the world changes around you, you need to be able to adapt to it, and you need to know how to overcome it and to survive it. And that's what Dad did all the time. He what he needed to do to know to survive, and that's, if you didn't know it, you tell him you do, and you learn it very quickly. And that's the lessons of it. You have to learn everything and learn it quickly, and be aware of everything going on around you.
Just to kind of pivot with that question, I think one of the hardest struggles today, or in this current generation, relating to the Holocaust is a lot of people want to compare everything to the Holocaust or to Nazis. And, you know, in my opinion and in my experience, there are other tragedies in the world, no doubt about it. And every tragedy should be given attention. But I believe the Holocaust stands on its own. And, you know, whether it's the Holocaust of Jews or the other victims of the Holocaust, there was only one solution to the Jewish question, the final solution to the Jewish question. They were trying to wipe us off the face of the earth. Nowadays, people want to point the finger and say, oh, you're being a Nazi. Oh, you're being a Nazi. Oh, this is like concentration camps. This is like that. And it's not, and it trivializes and takes away from the gravity and the magnitude of it, which that's always something that when somebody does that, I try to explain how what they're doing is actually quite disrespectful to the memory of the Holocaust. Now, in terms of the lessons of the Holocaust, yeah, it's what my father was saying, what my grandfather was saying. It's about not living in a bubble, and it's about asking the right questions early enough and not just trusting one thing my father told me when I was growing up, and I'm not sure where he heard it from, but believe half of what you hear and none of what you see. You know, it's about always being skeptical and taking everything with a grain of salt. So, you know, whether you watch one channel, read one newspaper, you don't just believe everything from one source. You try to find the same story from multiple sources. You talk to different people with different perspectives, whether it's, you know, one person from one side, one person from another, and you formulate your own opinions on the matter based on all the facts you can gather, not just what's given to you.
Yes, exactly. And I think all these stories about Holocaust, they make us value the things we have. For example, my generation, I think we have this problem, right? That we don't value many things we have. I don't know, maybe a little things, you know, like as food, for example. I was telling my mom that also for me doing these interviews, it has been helpful for me because I don't know, maybe it's a little detail, but maybe sometimes I didn't finish my food and I throw it up. Yeah, I throw it to the garbage. Sorry. So now I don't do that anymore because I think about all these survivors and all these people that suffered this, you know, as Johnny we have here, as Eva Perlman, that she's also a survivor. So I think these kind of stories, they help us to value more things and to know that this happened, this truly happened, so this never happened again, you know. We have the blessing to have here Johnny, Eva, and to hear the story of your dad, that even if he's not here anymore. Also Eddie, he's a son of survivors too, that I interviewed his mom. But yes, for example, Johnny says that surviving was from luck, you know. Eva says it was miracles. And in my opinion, it was, yes, miracle, you know, that you survived. Everyone has his own opinion, but
it's a combination of luck, miracles, being savvy.
100% luck.
But one thing that's also kind of interesting about survivors, and I'm sure some of the survivors who are in this conversation now might have an opinion. Like we said earlier, my grandfather grew up very religious. Like his family was basically Hasidic, you know, they studied Torah all the time, big family. But after the war, you know, he was part of the Jewish community, and I believe he might have kept kosher for a while, but he wasn't really religious. He was still Zionist.
He might have. The thing is, when he got married to your Nana, he gave her she knew, you know, his background, everything else, and Grandma grew up in a Jewish household. Was it completely observant? More than likely not. And he gave Nana the option. He said, "Do you know what household do you want to keep? Do you want to keep a kosher house? Do you want to keep a religious house, such as that?" And she chose, you know, the way she was brought up, you know, as being Jewish, but not being, you know, being religious, but not being completely observant.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the contrast of that, where when he was a kid, if he was on a school trip or something and somebody tried to give him scrambled eggs, he would want it to be hard boiled. That way he could make sure the egg wasn't cross contaminated and it was still kosher, because being in the shell, it couldn't
Right.
be contaminated with basari halavi, between dairy and meat and everything like that. But then later on, I know he loved to have shrimp with us when I was a kid. So it was just something where a lot of survivors, some of them went from not being religious to holding on to religion afterwards, and some went from being very religious to not being religious at all. So that's always something I find interesting with a lot of survivor stories, where his brother also, Zionist but not super religious, while his sister-in-law, who went through Romania, she didn't go through the camps, but she was still a survivor. She taught at Jewish day school for 40 years or so. So, it's always something that's just very interesting to me to see, people were targeted for being Jewish and how that Judaism either stayed with them or, they let it go, for lack of a better word, based on their experience.
Hi, I'm Eva Perlman, and I do not believe that it's only survivors. It happens all the time. People who now are growing up in very observant households and who decide not to be as observant. It has nothing to do, it's not necessarily a privilege of survivors to decide how observant or how not observant they will be.
Correct.
I just want to say something to Sam, which is that many survivors and children of survivors have eating disorders because of exactly what you just said. They don't want to throw out food. I was like that for many years, and I weighed way too much. I still weigh too much, but not as bad. But don't throw out the food. Don't feel that you have to eat every last thing on your plate, because that is very common, and to have that passed down in the generations is not a good. It's not good. We're in different circumstances now than we used to be, and now if you look at food the same way that people did during the war, you're going to get fat. So
70% of Americans are fat.
Of course.
Wait, so not 70% are Jewish.
One thing to provide a little bit of levity, my father could probably tell the story a little bit better. Dad, why don't you tell the story of how Zeta had 2 birthdays?
Oh, well, what happened is when Dad came to the U.S. and they asked him, at Ellis Island or wherever, filling out the paperwork, what's your birth date? Now, of course, growing up, they never had birthdays. They never celebrated them or anything like that. And Dad just picked, he said, well, he wanted something warm. He said, I was born July the 2nd, 1926. He didn't know anything, for example. Years later in the 70s, in the late 70s, when Dad was making his trips back to Poland, he was able to get a hold of birth certificates at the places in Lodz or wherever the capital was, and he found out that his actual birth date was March 19th, 1925, 1 year earlier. So for all the years of his growing up, we always had 2 birthdays for Dad. July the 2nd, he would be 1 year, and then the next March, he would be a year younger. And all of his official paperwork was always July the 2nd, 1926. When it came time for him to retire in Social Security, he went into the office and said, I'm here ready to file for my Social Security. They told Dad, you're only 64 years old. He said, no, I'm not. Dropped his birth certificate and said, I'm 65 now. So officially, even through all the years when he, knew his birth date, for all the years, I always had to give him 2 birthday presents, 2 birthday cards. He would get one in July, he would get one in March from us.
I too have had 2 birthdays.
So the same thing
I am
The same thing with you, John.
on my papers. I'm born in 1931, and actually I'm born in 1926. And then
Oh,
I have a third birthday, May the 4th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 1945. You know what
well,
it is?
yes, that's
When I was
yes, that would
liberated.
be when you were liberated. That's what I was going
Yeah,
to say.
I always celebrate this hour.
Where are you at, Johnny?
For me,
Where are you located?
I am in Montreal.
Where are you living?
In Montreal, did you see the snow? Well,
I
send it to you.
it's too cold. Kijk, kakken af in
Yeah.
jam there.
I used to love
All
the
right.
snow, not anymore.
Wow, yes. I
Later
was going
on, we will do it in Yiddish.
I was going to say
Josh?
that also, for example,
I was gonna say,
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Know that my great grandfather, well, he also had kind of two birthdays, but we didn't know his real birthday till 4 years ago. You know, my grandma, after her 70s, all her life, she thought that his birthday was in December. You know, and we discovered that it was in November. Well, but he changed it. I think because obviously he knew about his birthday. But I wanted to say that, you know, that many years before after that we just found out that he wasn't born in December. So yeah, that's a common thing that happened. So okay, I want to ask you a question of, well, I think she went out because she ran out of battery, but we had here Miriam Feldman, that he's the founder of an organization here in Mexico called Instruments of Hope, Instrumentos de la Esperanza, that she recollects music instruments of survivors, Holocaust survivors and all this, and
Not
she
only
was
survivors, not only survivors, let's say the instruments are survivors of the Holocaust, for that, just.
and she wanted to ask you, well, now that we are here, Joshua, Barry, Eva, Johnny, Eddie, if you know any survivor or of someone related to the Holocaust that used to play an instrument, you know, at that time.
I don't.
I think I knew my father to play was hooky from school.
Yeah.
No, never any musical in our family.
Yeah, my grandfather was a juvenile delinquent, basically. He was a trouble hellraiser, if you will. You know, I remember one story. He broke a shop's window with an apple. I don't remember exactly why, but he did it. He ran and whatever. But you know, kind of circling back, another thing that was just kind of interesting. You know, he became, going back to Poland all the time, he became friends with the people who had a house on the land where his house used to be, and like there was no resentment or anything. That's Henrik and Maria, you know, right there on the little creek, and then, you know, going back to other areas, which I always just found cool. And I saw Henrik and Maria a year and a half ago when I was there. I know we're kind of past that point in the conversation, but it was just kind of
Maria
interesting.
passed.
Passed,
John.
Yeah. I saw Henrik, and you know, I think I had you on FaceTime or whatever. You talked to Henrik when I was there.
Yeah.
Would you
So,
believe
okay, I don't.
Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Johnny.
Would you believe that in Auschwitz we have the best orchestra, best musicians in the world? Would you believe it?
I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, sure. Every time we walk from the Arbeitsmarkt free, they were standing in, and the best musician in the world. And
Well,
I knew one, I knew one who was playing trumpet. He was selected to crematorium after. He was
if they had high motivation to be the best, because if they weren't, they were killed.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of the way it worked. You know, there's a lot of nuances and interesting tales about Auschwitz that a lot of people don't understand. Like I said earlier, my grandfather was in like this masonry school where they would teach him to lay bricks and take it apart and everything. Where you hear Auschwitz, and it's the biggest death camp in the world, and yet they still had these little things going on there, which it's hard for people to rationalize that.
Would you believe that in Auschwitz we have a school? We have a school. Oh yeah, nobody heard about it. I was going to one of the schools.
Yeah, my grandfather was in the masonry school. That's what he did.
Yeah, that's right. Maurer school. I think I know him.
Yeah, he was in that school with his brother.
Maurer in German. Maurer means bricklayer.
Yeah, mortar. Yeah, mortar, bricklayer. Yeah, he was. They had a reunion of that class in Israel several years ago, like 30 years ago, and one of the people who was in that class, he was actually with him in Sachsenhausen later on. And my grandfather was in Sachsenhausen until the death march for 3 weeks or so, and him and his brother kept this one person alive. Now, him and his brother, when they were being set out to do the death march, they went back in line a second time to get an extra ration of bread and a can of meat or whatever it was, because like I said, they took very calculated risks, but they carried this guy for days and probably a week or so until they reached a town, and they let him go there because he had a better chance of not being shot and killed in the town than if they were in the woods. Now, when they dropped him in the town, the Red Cross picked him up versus if they were in the woods or something, the Nazis just would have shot him on the spot. Later on, at that reunion of the mortar people, the bricklayers, the guy said that he wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for the Szafran brothers.
Well, that's why he survived.
Yeah, my grandfather saved his life.
Yeah. Well, there's many things which to talk about Auschwitz.
There's a lot of things where people who were there, they had to make decisions where if somebody was dying, do you try to keep them alive or do you let them die because they're going to die anyway and you want to keep the food for yourself to stay alive? And those were tough decisions that people had to make every day, and you can't hold it against them. Go ahead.
I was working Block 19. Block 19 was a hospital, and that's why I survived. I have enough food to share with somebody else, to share with people.
Yeah, there was somebody in the hospital wing who told my grandfather that his brother didn't make it. Like, he knew somebody in Block 19 who came from his same small town, because my grandfather knew everywhere he went, he knew somebody, whether it was a friend from a previous ghetto camp or whatever, anything like that. He always had a connection.
Well, that's one answer is luck.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I was working in a hospital. He was lucky that he was a bricklayer in the Maurer school. That's how few of us survive.
Yes, well, obviously, as I said, all the opinions are worthy. You think it's luck, for example. Well, me, it's like a personal. I can't obviously understand what is living in my own, like you, Johnny, you went through. But I personally think it was obviously people that survived as you. It's because God had a purpose for you. Maybe it's this, that you are telling your story with us so we don't forget what happened. I don't know. That's my point of view, and so personal. I just wanted to say that. And also, last question that Isaac and me were curious about is that Barry or Joshua, can you tell us a little bit more about that school in Auschwitz, the school that Nathan was in, like the Mason school, because it's a topic that it's not really known,
I'm sure not many people, Johnny, knows that there was a school in the camp. Not many people knew that there is a school in the camp, Johnny.
No, there was two schools, not only this one.
Two schools.
Yeah, the other school was nursing school. That's where I went.
Right. And it was a school for the kids. It was a school
I was working.
School. And for what? If they wanted to kill everybody, for what they teach them?
luck. That's the whole story. Read my book. You will find out.
Well, it was essentially slave labor. They
Yeah.
what people don't realize, the Jews were slaves at the time during the Holocaust, and by giving them a skill, it was a skill for the slaves to use. Like when my grandfather was then in Sachsenhausen after Auschwitz, he worked with the gardens, whatnot. But at one point, because he had the history of sheet metal, and
Yes.
there was another guy from his town there, and he's like, "Tell them you're a master sheet metal person." And the guy didn't say it, and that's the last time my grandfather saw the guy. I guess the guy might have been afraid to lie or something, but if he had said it, he would have been sent to where my grandfather was sent to, like, this airplane factory, and it was having that skill, and he was being forced to give free labor to the Nazi war movement at that point, basically. That's
Yeah, so
even at Auschwitz, a lot of people don't understand there were actually 3 camps. There was Birkenau, there was the Central, and then there was a factory.
There was 50 camps around.
Well,
Wow.
yeah, there was a lot of sub camps and everything, but there were the 3 main things where it was the main camp.
Birkenau 1, Birkenau 2, and Auschwitz.
Well, the factory as well, and that's where they actually produced the Zyklon B.
yeah.
That's where they produced the gas that they use in the showers.
Okay. Yes. What I now I think we are going to the end of this meeting, but yes, I think it's
Yeah, I gotta go.
yes, don't worry. I wanted just to say a comment from Eva that I think she had to go, but she was telling you, Joshua and Barry, that you should write a book about your story. Well, Nathan's story. And okay, so for finishing this meeting, I just wanted to show 2 things. Well, show these photos. The first one, it's about your dad and grandfather and his brother. Just all of you to know them, the 2 survivors, right? The 2 Szafran survivors.
Yep.
Yes, Uncle is 93 right now. He'll be 94 next February.
Yes, I would love to interview him. So yeah, maybe we can do
Yeah.
that. And also, I wanted to this photo I got it in the testimony, but I went to show it because you can see the result of surviving. Like all the family that they had. So I wanted to show this photo of your beautiful family.
Yeah, this was in 2001.
Joshua, what happened to your hair, Josh?
How about you, huh?
Okay, and one last thing I want to do is that I wrote a poem for your for the memory of Nathan, of your dad and your grandfather. So I will show it here and I will read it and I will send it to you to have it. Okay, it says, he was so young, he lost a lot. His skill saved him. His smart mind set him free. Now his story is running through the air, so we never forget. Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you so much, Joshua, for telling Nathan's story. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Agustin, Ron, Eddie, Ale. Thank you everyone, Sharon, Marcos, Abraham, for being here in this meeting. And I hope you have, well, for the ones that celebrate Christmas, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone. And we will have these interviews of many other people. So keep an eye on the page of the Voice of the Silence. And thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you so much, Barry.
Thank you for organizing.
Keep you good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yo.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, Sam, if you could, post a link to that YouTube testimony my grandfather did with this on Facebook or whatever, so other people can actually see his full thing. He did it in 2001, I want to say.
We will do it on Diario Judío, Joshua.
What was that, Isaac?
We will put also the link, Samantha will send it to me, and in the article and where we put the interview and this interview, we will put it also in our media. That it's Diario Judío, and this is Jewish website and many others. So we will put it also there.
Yeah, my father actually, he was given 5 VHS tapes when they did it in 2001. He had it converted into digital and uploaded it all to YouTube. So he did that. It's like 2.5 hours long, but it's a very good detailed interview of his story, which for people that are curious, it would definitely help them to get more information.
Exactly. I will post it. So thank you so much, and we keep in touch. So well, bye. Say bye to Barry, to Joshua. I think that we are ending this
All right.
meeting. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.